You mentioned Ron Davis, and I think one of his most famous works is The Gift of Dyslexia. Would you mind giving us a brief summary of who Ronald Davis is, what the Davis method is, and also why does he call it the gift of dyslexia?
Oh, I'm not sure if I can do it quickly. That's a big question, like four questions in one.
Let's start. Who is Ron Davis? Like
So,
what?
so Ron Davis is, in my mind, an extraordinary individual. For me, he's up there with the likes of Albert Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton. I don't think there's anybody really alive today that compares with him from that point of view. You have to look back in history for real. He's an extraordinary individual. So he is retired now from the main Davis organization, although he keeps a very watchful eye on it, generally speaking, because I think he's in his 80s. So he was born in the United States. He was born a Canna's baby, which is an old term for autism. He was basically born before the term autism was invented. It came along in his early life, and I think later on he got that label. He was basically where in the United States, I can't remember where he was born in the United States, but pre or during the Second World War, I think. So he's in his 80s now, in fact. He basically, in school, as about, I think, a 9 or a 12-year-old, my timing and dates are going to be a little vague here because I don't know all of his story, because he hasn't published all of it. He's published some of it. So he was basically, as a young boy, labeled mentally retarded and uneducatable when he was in school. And this was mainly because he was actually autistic and dyslexic. He had a double whammy. He had both of those conditions. Okay.
Is it common to have both?
It's a lot more common than people think, but usually the most severe symptom gets the label. Mm-hmm. So I've just done an assessment with a young man who is in this basic gray zone between severely ADHD and mildly autistic. And when I looked at his reading, he was clearly tripping up with his reading. He wasn't reading at grade level. He's probably about 3 years below his grade level, and he's 16, I think. And he's got all these markers that sort of put him into the autistic category. But he doesn't have, this is according to his mother, he doesn't have enough markers or sort of points to make him autistic. So he's right on the edge. So they labeled him, well, he's had all kinds of labels over the years. It's kind of sad. He must have at least a dozen labels at this point because no one could actually sort of put him in one camp easily. Mm-hmm. So he's basically got sort of both things going on. Ron was the same. He had both things going on. And Ron looks back now, and you can go to the main Davis Autism website. Ron talks about his story there. But he was basically severely dyslexic and autistic. And he was just written off as a kid. I mean, we're talking about the 50s or 60s when he was in school. And the mentality back then was just put them in a home. That was it, right? And we didn't even have medication back then for kids who were on that spectrum, unless it just really just stupefied them, in effect. But so his mother took him out of school, I think, at a certain point when he was younger. And at 17, someone gave him an IQ test, because IQ tests were very popular in the United States. And they said they realized he had an IQ of a genius. And it was mainly through mathematics. He was what you would today describe as somebody who was an autistic savant. So there wasn't any maths he couldn't do. And the picture that sort of springs into my mind, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, with Dustin Hoffman, he was kind of like that, this autistic genius with maths, but he couldn't communicate with speech. So they said, we've got to teach this kid to talk because he's got this really, really high IQ. So they began to do speech therapy with him, I think, when he was 17, and he began to speak more and more and more. And he didn't discover that he was dyslexic until he was in college at the age of 38. And at the age of 38, he had all these symptoms, but he thought everybody else had the same thing. When he looked at the alphabet, for example, that he gives in his book, is that the letters would go fuzzy and they would move around. And you tell that to most people who are not dyslexic, and they'll go, well, that's ridiculous. Letters don't move. Mm-hmm. But to him, he could literally make them move on the page like he was hallucinating. And the mistake that a lot of parents do is they read that and they say to their little one, do the letters move? And the little one goes, no, right? So they all, it can't be dyslexia then. But he had extremely severe symptoms. Okay, I saw certain things happen, but I didn't. The way he describes the letters move, I never saw it like that. I had other things happen when I tried to read. So he basically was realized that he was dyslexic at 38, and he basically did something that was very unusual, mainly because he didn't have the filters, I think, that said, no, you can't do these things. Because he was autistic, most people are, most sort of non-autistic, non-learning disability people will be able to do things that autistic people can't do. So you have like a filter system that says, don't pick your nose, don't have a food fight, don't stick your tongue out, don't do all these things. Well, they also have other filters in there, like don't talk back to teachers, don't disrupt, don't think what you think what we want you to think, memorize this stuff for the test. So he didn't have those filters in there because he was autistic. So he went looking in the only place he could, which was inside his own thinking. When he misread a word, he started going, well, what's going on in my thinking? And a lot of dyslexic people do this because they get asked, why can't you read that word? I remember being asked that a lot. So they say, well, why can't you read? Everyone else can do it. Why can't you do it? And I go, I don't know. I'm told. Like, well, I don't know. You tell me. You're the teacher. But I got asked it enough that I began to think about my thinking. And I think I've met a lot of young clients and a lot of dyslexic people begin to think about their thinking, which I think lineal thinking people don't do as much, or they do it differently. So Ron went looking in his own thinking and said, well, why can't I do these things? And when I read, what happens? What's my experience? And what he discovered was a way to essentially focus that allowed him to basically turn off the part of his brain that was causing what he then realized later on that was causing his dyslexia. So essentially he found the cause by accident, and then he gave it a name by accident. But he went looking for why he couldn't read. And he talks about this story in our training. He talks about it in his books. He talks about what other people call focusing, right? When you really think about it, we don't teach people to focus, but we demand that they do it, right? The one skill that that everyone will insist that you can do when you go to school is focus. And when I complained about it at home, I remember my grandfather saying to me, don't be stupid, boy, everybody knows how to concentrate, get on with it. And I was like, well, every time I try to concentrate, my reading falls apart. And Ron had the same experience. So he went looking at what is focusing. And a lot of people don't do that. And he did it to a finite degree, is what separates him from other people. And what he found was that all of the symptoms of his dyslexia were actually the symptoms of him being disoriented. And this is what all of his discoveries are about, how disorientation affects our mind when we do certain things. And a lot of people don't like that answer because it sounds like you're drunk or something. But being drunk is a chemical disorientation, where he's talking about a very small, subtle disorientation happens when you're not aware of it. And when we really understand his work, we realize it changes the way we view learning disabilities, autism, and I think mental health in general. Okay. But it's quite a hard sell. So all of Ron's work is based on his discoveries from his point of view as somebody who is severely dyslexic and autistic. And he says in his books, and he talks about it personally, he said, I just wanted to feel normal, and I didn't. And he also said in private, like he just said, well, I just didn't fit, and I knew I didn't fit. And he just was trying to always fit into society, right? And we don't fit. He's sort of struggling to fit, making mistakes and socially inappropriate behavior and all these things that manifest around these conditions. So he just said, well, I'm not getting help from the outside, so I'll figure it out for myself. And that's basically what he did. And that's what sort of elevates him in my mind and puts him into this really sort of genius realm, because he's discovered what is causing these problems in people.
Hi, I do hope you enjoyed that video. If you would like to find the nearest Davis facilitator to you, you need to go to the links below. They'll be listed in the description somewhere, depending on which channel you're watching this on. If you want to find the nearest Davis facilitator to you, I suggest you go there and just follow the links. If you're interested in training as a Davis facilitator, then again, just go to the links below. You'll find training there. Or if you're looking for a program for yourself, you can also go to those links. My suggestion, if you are really interested in Davis, the best thing to do is to pick up the phone and start talking to a Davis facilitator closest to you, because they will be able to answer all of your questions. That's it for now. See you in the next video.